看
好，
看
你试一下，
你能不能
好的
看到，
啊，可以
可以是吧
可以看到，对对对，很
？OK，
好。
那我先暂停了哈。
对对对，暂停一下，好，看看这个我们这个还有今天要有50多位现在在线陆续，可能我们还是正式等一下那个到8点钟再正式开始啊。这个原机在线吗？原机？原机在线吗？张原机？好，原机上了没？
蒋老师，我们这边已经安排好了。
哦，安排好了是吧？
嗯，
啊，那这样那个董老师，我想这样啊，就是我们现在马上开始到时间了啊，徐老师也在线，就是先请各位现在已经在线的各位老师同学，能不能把视频开一下？我们先有一个这个简单的这个线上的合影，可以吗？
我需不需要把耳机拿下来？
呃，这个可以，这都可以，你带到都可以，你觉得失误都行啊
啊，
啊。
那我拿下来，你结束了，你跟我说一下，因为我不知道什么时候结束哈。
好，
你给我做个
好，
手势
那
，OK。
个张元基，你赶紧这个截一下图
老师，我截一下，
啊，可能有多个画面啊，这个截完以后告诉我一下啊，然后我们就可以这个其他就可以暂时关掉。
老师可以了。那个
好，
大家开视频的那一页都截了。
好，谢谢各位啊，这个大家可以关掉了，谢谢啊。好，各位线上的老师、专家和各位同学，大家周末好啊！这个今天呢，我们线上啊，这个有一个 FEM 的公益论坛啊，这个请了2位这个海外的专家来给我们就这个供应链韧性啊这个相关主题来做2场这个报告。我想呢，在这个公益论坛之前啊，这个简单啊，这个把我们这个背景啊有一个介绍。FEM 啊，这个是 Frontiers of Engineering Management，这个是由中国工程院主管中国工程院和高等教育出版社、清华大学和华东科大联合主办的这样的一个 英文性的学术期刊啊。这几年应该说，至于这个工程管理的理论发展，可以讲在这个工程管理学科这个整个的科研和教学的工作者这个一线实践等等啊这方面，应该说提供了一个非常好的国际交流平台啊。期刊呢也先后被 ESCI 啊等相关的检索收录啊。那么今天呢，我们这个工程管理的公益讲坛呢，可以讲是这个 FEM 这个编辑部啊，这个来整体来筹划。那么今天我们只是其中的一部分啊。这次呢，我们这个的主题就是供应链韧性啊。大家都知道这个这几年来啊，这个全球的各个国家啊，包括像美国、日本、欧盟等等，都非常重视这个产业链供应链的韧性。那么我们党的这个20届三中全会啊，包括这个习近平总书记多次强调，中国作为一个大国啊，这个在产业链供应链上面呢，应该不能掉链子。同时呢，我们也要有大国的担当啊，怎么能够将我国的这个产业链供应链韧性的和安全水平的提升，也是现在啊当前的一个重大的这个国家需求。所以呢，今天我们围绕这样的一个主题啊，这个既是世界的一个主题，也是中国的这个一个很关注的一个热点的问题，从我们运营管理这个角度来剖析这个供应链韧性的这个相关的前沿研究。那么我们今天请到2位专家，那么呢，这个因为时差关系啊，这个2位专家其实非常辛苦，应该是当地时间的早上7点啊。这个第一位专家是来自美国乔治城大学的崔世亮教授，那么第2位呢是美国圣路易斯华盛顿大学的张富强教授啊。这个我们第一位呢是由崔老师来给我们做报告。在报告之前，我简单介绍一下崔老师啊。崔老师目前呢，他是美国乔治亚城大学的这个麦克道纳商学院的终身正教授啊。他的研究领域是在运营和这个分析、商务分析这个方面，主要是关注到这个流程或者过程的这个改善，包括在产品和服务2个方面。那么产品这方面主要是强调这个设计和供应链的这个战略，那么服务呢，主要是强调这个服务这个机制的创新啊。它的一些非常这个重要的一些研究呢，是在 Management Science Operation Research 还有 MSOM、POM 等这个国际顶级期刊发表。同时呢，他也是在这个领域很有这个学术影响力，包括在 MSOM 和这个MSOM 和这个 POM 2个这个顶级期刊呢担任了这个副主编。所以呢，这个非常荣幸啊，能够邀请到崔老师来今天给我们做这个报告。那么今天他这个报告的主题就是围绕着这个在全球供应链里面如何来这个管理好这个地缘政治风险啊，从这个角度来实现这个供应链韧性的提升啊。下面呢，我们就想把这个宝贵的时间交给这个崔老师，请崔老师为我们做报告。崔老师。
好，谢谢姜老师的介绍。好，我待会报告是用英语的，我现在把这个报告投屏一下。谢谢大家星期五晚上过来参加，非常感谢这个平台给了这个机会，让我分享一下最近的一些科研的成果。大家能不能看到？
可以看到，崔老师。
好，那我就开始了啊。对，因为这个期刊是英语的，所以今天那个姜老师说这个讲座也用英语，但是大家待会提问，我觉得在我讲的时候提问或在最后提问都可以，中文英文都可以，好吗 ？OK， 那我就开始讲了。So today what I'm going to talk about is a strategic framework for managing geopolitical risks in global supply chain. Okay. So yeah, my name is Shiliang Cui. I'm from Georgetown University's McDonough School of Business in the United States. This is joint work with actually a big group of people. They're from prestigious institutions all over the world. So we have been working with as a team for a long time. So this is our latest research on supply chain. Okay, so supply chains have always faced disruption risks, right? And that's why we supply chain researchers, right, and supply chain managers in the company, that's basically our full-time job, right, to deal with supply chain disruptions. So if you think about supply chain disruptions, right, it could include the natural disasters, right? It could include the supply bankruptcies, right, and even the supply disruption from the COVID-19 pandemic, right? But most recently, geopolitical risks have become a major concern for multinational companies, right? So what is the geopolitical risk? I think most of you are very familiar with this concept. But here's a definition from a recent AER article. So this article defines geopolitical risks as the risk that is associated with wars, terrorist acts, and the tensions between states that affect the normal and the peaceful course of international relations, right? So geopolitical risk captures both the risk that these events have either materialized or any new risks, right, that could escalate based on the existing events, right? So let me just give you some examples, right? So recently, the US President-elect Donald Trump, he announced plans to impose substantial tariffs on goods from China, Mexico, and Canada on day one when he returns to the White House, right, on January the 20th, 2025. I think it's going to be 10% on goods produced from China and 25% on goods produced from Mexico and Canada, right? Another example is the war in Ukraine, right, where almost all Western countries have banned most trade with Russian companies. Okay, and also the third example here, there's also a threat currently that the war in the Mideast could develop into a major armed conflict, right? So if that's the case, it will definitely disrupt energy supply and transportation. So there are many other examples of geopolitical risks, right? But what we know, what is certain is that companies are now more and more confronted with an expanded role of governments that want to actually influence corporate supply chain decisions. Okay, so what makes geopolitical risks differ from other types of supply chain risks, right, that we have dealt with before? Okay, first, if you think about the nature or the intention of geopolitical risks, right, they are primarily driven by the deliberate decisions of individuals, particularly those in positions of power within the governments, right? So think about, Donald Trump of the US or Vladimir Putin from Russia, or Israel's Prime Minister, right, Benjamin Netanyahu. So this actually contracts with risks from, for example, natural disasters or pandemics, where the sources are non-purposeful and arise from natural causes, right? And in fact, if you think about the name, right, what is a geopolitical risk, right? It is driven by two components, political and geographic, right? So the political aspect indicates that disruptions are caused by government actions, right, based on country-specific political and economical interests. The geographic aspect highlights that these risks are typically tied to specific locations, right? So this will require, a strategic a country or entire region level perspective, right, that will consider the complexities of international relations, right? So that's the first difference. Second, in terms of interaction, development, and persistency, right? Supply chain disruptions caused by natural disasters or supply failure, supply distress are typically localized, right? For example, some suppliers went down, right? So it would affect this one supplier or supply chains that include the supplier, right? So these typically only affect specific areas or very individual companies, right? But in contrast, if you think about geopolitical risks, they can actually impact all of the companies within a country or within a big region, right? Think about all the companies that currently do business in Middle East. So these are the companies that would be affected, right? In fact, also their supply chain, their suppliers, right, or their clients, right? So that's the scope of geopolitical risks, right? And in terms of duration, the impacts of geopolitical risk also tends to be longer in duration. Finally, I want to talk about predictability, right? So if you think about it, right, accurately predicting, the location and timing of natural disasters or epidemics, right, within a supply chain is nearly impossible, right? You don't know when or where, the earthquake is going to happen, right, until the very last moment, right? Even currently these days, we have very advanced modeling or data science tools. We will not be able to predict natural disasters, right? In contrast, if you think about geopolitical disruptions, right, they typically unfold gradually, right? Meaning that they will allow for a growing awareness of potential challenges in high-risk regions. So, for example, the example that we just talked about, right? Let's say Trump decides to impose tariffs, right, on products from other countries, but he always announce tariffs in advance, right? So it's a gradual process. So this makes geopolitical risks somewhat predictable, right? At least managers, they can imagine, right, what is going to happen, what the scenario is going to happen, even though they cannot 100% predict, right? So in the case of tariff, for example, if Trump announces tariff half a year or a year in advance, it will buy some companies some time to stockpile additional units if needed. Okay. Any questions so far? All right. So on the next slide, I'm going to talk about the different specific disruptors that geopolitical risks can lead to. Okay. So first one is a tariff, right? So we talked about this just now, right? If you impose tariff on imports from other countries, right, that will introduce a financial burden on the global supply chains, right? So they can undermine the long-term financial viability of supply chains because they can increase costs, and they can also lead to retaliation, right? They can lead to retaliatory actions, right, from the other country, right, the country that you impose tariffs, right, and eventually this may escalate into a trade war, right? So we've heard of a U.S.-China trade war all the time, right? So that's tariff, okay? In prolonged international conflicts, right, for example, governments, they often impose sanctions, right, that will prohibit the trade of certain goods, services, and capital, right? So, for example, now the Western countries, as I mentioned before, have imposed many restrictions, many sanctions, right, on Russia, right? If you think about the scope of the restricted products, right, they can actually vary by case and can include, for example, military goods, right, or they can include what's so-called dual-use products. So dual-use products are those that have both military and civilian applications, right? Or even sanctions can include just very basic, very common everyday commodities, right? But this is going to be problematic for companies, because for companies, this means a fragmented supply chain, right? Where certain materials suddenly become sanctioned, become unavailable, but other materials remain unaffected. Okay, I don't know if that makes sense. Okay, so next one is taxes, right? So for companies managing global supply chain, maximizing after-tax profits is usually a key objective, right? So the goal is to make money. And the tax burdens imposed by various countries would significantly influence decision making, right? So a lot of companies actually would shift costs to high tax countries, right? Because in that case, it can reduce their overall tax exposure, right? So we are all familiar with the practice called transfer pricing, right? But you know, governments are also smart. They are actively work to counter such practices, right? Additionally, companies need to also consider trading balances in their supply network, right? Because if you have significant disparities, it will prompt the governments to impose retaliatory taxes or sanctions, right? So in that sense, a lot of companies are practicing what's so-called a natural hedging strategy, in the sense that their trading balance you know, almost cancel out, right? Almost close to. You will have a labor shortage, right? You could have a infrastructure destruction. You could have supply chain disruption just because of the breakdown of public orders, right? And if you think about modern warfare, right, it typically also includes the cyber attacks, right? So that's another aspect that will disrupt the supply chain. Okay. The last one is actually very interesting, right? So I call it weaponized supply chain. So what is that, right? It means that the supply chains themselves can become a tool that is being used to weaken an enemy, okay, like a weapon, right? So for example, you probably have heard that Israel recently have set up an entire supply chain to sell pagers, right? Those electrical devices, pagers, to Lebanese Hezbollah, right? So basically, the pagers contain bombs, right? So literally, they become a remote controllable means for precision attacks, right? Using these pagers, right? So that's an example of weaponized supply chain, right? A less dramatic example, right, that we all know of is the U.S. claim that Huawei, right, in 5G telecommunication networks, U.S. claims that Huawei enables our Chinese government to conduct surveillance and potentially, interact or hijack their networks, right? So that's U.S. claim. That's another example of a weaponized supply chain, right? To a less dramatic. Okay. All right. Any questions so far? So for the past 15 minutes, right, I've talked about the different forms of geopolitical risks, right? And I hope by now you agree that companies are facing more and more geopolitical risks, right? So in light of these geopolitical risks, and then that is happening, right? How should the companies adjust, you know, their supply chain strategies accordingly, right, to deal with geopolitical risks, right? So that's important, right? And that's the basically the million-dollar question, right? So that's why our research team came up with a framework. Okay, so we came up with a framework, and in this framework, our recommended approach actually consists of 3 key elements. Okay, one, we recommend companies to prepare. Okay, so that number 1 step is to prepare by developing fundamental methodologies. Okay, for example, collecting data, defining future impactful scenarios. Okay. Step 2 is to anticipate. Okay, is to conduct anticipatory strategies by developing, either process adjustments or structural design changes. Okay, and finally, 3, the companies have to react to disruptions as they occur, right? Through implementation of a wide range of short-term or long-term policies. Okay, so let me now actually break them down a little bit. Okay, so let's first talk about the first element of our framework. It focuses on basically gathering information to support effective planning. It's an exercise. Okay, it's a planning exercise. Basically, you need to gather information, right? This, for example, involves identifying potential future scenarios that could result in disruptions or changes to the operating environment of the supply chain, of the company's supply chain, right? This can include, geopolitical risk discussed earlier, or it can include other type of risk as well. Okay, so a critical aspect. Okay, I'm talking about bullet point B now. A critical aspect is real-time, global-scale geopolitical risk monitoring, right? So this is to ensure timely awareness of emerging threats, right? So for example, in the US, companies like Cisco and Boeing, they have actually always implemented very extensive processes to achieve this, okay? So they typically use a third-party provider to observe events on a global basis in real time. So it's very impressive. All right, it's basically a full-time job of the third-party provider. So these providers would report, for example, disruption at a particular location, and that would automatically trigger a playbook to drive interventions by the company right away to mitigate the impact, any negative impact on the supply chain performances. Okay, so the third component, bullet point C here, is the modeling and optimization, right? You need that because you need to think about the interactions between different decisions, material flows, and information flows, right? Because the goal is to enhance the supply chain overall resilience. You need the modeling and optimization to basically capture the consequences, right? To quantify the consequences of your planning exercise. Okay, so that's the first element, right? Basically getting information, imagine scenarios, right? The second element of our framework focuses on developing anticipatory strategies. Okay, what is an anticipatory strategy? Well, it is basically a proactive measure that will be implemented even before disruptions occur, right? So you want to be prepared, you want to be proactive, you want to do something even before the actual event happens, right? So for example, Trump now has announced the tariff. Sorry, so what do we do? What are our anticipatory strategies, right? So anticipatory strategies can include, for example, short-term inventory and the capacity adjustments, right? For example, Trump is going to impose a tariff. Maybe as a company, we should stockpile more units, right? That's an example I already mentioned. So that's an anticipatory strategy, right? So I'm doing that even before the event is going to happen. The event may not happen, right? Maybe US and China or Mexico or Canada, they work out some deals and the tariff is eventually canceled, right? But I'm already stockpiling units anyway. Okay, so this is a stockpiling, for example, is an example of short-term inventory or capacity adjustment, right? But it can also involve long-term, more complicated restructuring decisions. Okay, so why do we do this? Why do we believe anticipatory strategies are important? Because they can play a crucial role to one, reduce your supply chain's exposure to geopolitical risks, right? So for example, if I have stockpiled units, when tariff actually hits, I'm more prepared, right? And the two, anticipatory strategies will enable my step three, that is the reactive adaptations once disruption have occurred. Okay, so I'm going to mention that again when we talk about the step three. But if you don't do something before the disruption is coming, then when it actually comes, then you're going to get lost. You're going to take so much lead time to figure out what you need to do. Okay. So as I just mentioned, right, we distinguish between two types of anticipatory strategies, right? So the first type, the top bracket, right? The first type focuses on process adjustments, and the bottom bracket here focus on network structure design. Okay, so process adjustments. So I'm talking about a company supply chain or operations process, right? So these adjustments can be relatively quick to implement, right? So for example, think about supply chain strategies like global directed buy agreement or risk-adjusted customer managed inventory, right? Which I'm going to tell you an example of a company doing that. Or just you want to streamline your process, right? So these strategies can adapt your supply chain processes to achieve, better or stronger or enhanced resilience. Okay, they usually require a short to medium time to implement, but they can be actually effective and cost efficient at the same time. Okay, so if you think about process adjustments, they typically allow the company to just continue using their existing supply chain structures or partners, right? You need probably additional safeguards. You need probably to reorganize your processes, but you can work with your existing, partners or supply chain footprint, for example. Okay. The lower bracket, on the other hand, so that focuses on network restructuring. So that is basically modifying a company's supply chain footprint, right? So for example, if you think about what we call source diversification, right? That is for Western companies, they used to have manufacturing in China, but now they're also thinking about building factories in other parts or other countries in light of the geopolitical risk. Okay, so these strategies involve relatively long-term strategic decisions, right? Because, for example, if you want to relocate to a different country, those decisions will require board approval, right? Because of the complexity of the redesign of the supply chain, as well as the relatively very significant costs. Okay, so these supply chain redesigns are definitely very impactful, right? But they are only pursued, right, when your process adjustments are insufficient, right? So for example, think about the tariff, the example that I have been mentioning today, right? As a company, maybe I should first consider stockpiling more products, right? If it doesn't work, or if the tariff seems going to last forever, then maybe I have to move my manufacturer capability to a country that is tariff-free. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's the difference between short-term process adjustment and a long-term structural redesign. Okay, all right, so finally, let's talk about the third and the last element of our framework, right? So we call that reactive adaptations, right? Which are adjustments made to my supply chain in response to disruption, right? So this is a reactive strategy, right? Which means that the disruption has already happened. You are reacting to whatever has occurred, right? Now, very important, and I mentioned before as well, these adaptations often rely on prior anticipatory strategies, right? If you think about the second step, these anticipatory strategies, these actually act as an investment, right, in your reactive adaptations, or what we call the real options, right? So it gives you option, not an obligation, right, to do something. So that's a real option, right? So examples of reactive adaptations can include reallocation production volume, right? Or reallocate, for example, material procurement, right, to backup sources, right? But I mean, if you want to reallocate your production, you had to, for example, secure suppliers, secure OEMs, right, even before the disruption happens, right? So that's an example of anticipatory strategies. You secure production capacity with a supplier. You don't produce anything, right? But you invest in the real option. You maybe pay some capacity or investment costs to make sure that if disruption really happens, you have a backup. And then when the disruption happens, when tariff strikes, now you are just going to use your contingency plan. You're going to say, okay, now I'm going to produce in whatever country that now I have backup capacity. So that is my reactive adaptation. Okay, all right. So so again, the key here is reactive adaptations can provide good mitigation of geopolitical risk disruptions, but they are only viable, they're only possible if you have made the necessary preparation investments, okay, beforehand. Okay. If you think about companies that are successful, or companies that are not successful, or companies, you know, that have went bankrupt during geopolitical risk, they often delay implementing resilience strategies until after disruption has occurred, right? And that's often too late, because then now they had to face challenges due to very long lead times, which will be required to structure their supply chain, right, or onboard the new suppliers, right? So therefore, again, I want to emphasize that when we have geopolitical risk, right, or in fact any kind of risk, it's very important that some measures have to be planned and adopted proactively rather than reactively, right, to in order to effectively address your geopolitical risks with disruptions. Okay, all right. Any questions about the framework? It's actually very general, right, but it's very systematic. So I hope that it's useful. Okay, so for the final 10 minutes, I want to talk about some company examples. Because our framework was in fact developed through interviews with leading multinational companies across different industries. Okay, so let me talk about actually 3 examples now. Okay, so the first company is a global manufacturer of agricultural machineries. Okay, they have factories across the Americas, across the Europe, across China, and they serve demand over I think 140 countries. Okay, so it's a very big company. Its supply chain is highly globalized. Okay, so what is its supply chain strategy? Okay, so its supply chain strategy is underpinned by what's so-called the preparation is everything. Okay, so their supply chain principle is preparation is everything. All right, so that's what I talked about when I discussed the framework just now as well. So in order to address geopolitical risks, this company's supply chain function or division, they continuously monitor and develop potential disruption scenarios. Okay, and for each scenario, they develop a playbook, right? Basically, a playbook is your action book, right? outlining a predefined response plan. Okay, so they're very proactive, right? And this proactive approach emphasize very swift, very quick action in case that the supply chain disruptions really happen, because they have basically imagined all of it. They have prepared all of it, right? So whenever in the event of a supply chain disruption, the company will able to maintain operations, right? Because of the predefined response plan. They just act on it. They just act according to the playbook, while the competitors of this company are still trying to formulate solutions or responses, right? So that's basically this strategy. As you can see that they're going through the framework that I just talked about. Okay. A second example here is an American multinational technology company. Okay, so this company is also very big. It sells products in about 170 countries. Okay, so it's a global company. But this company somewhat faces very significant geopolitical risks, because they have a high concentration of supply sources, primarily in a single country, which you may guess is China, all right? And this is a US company. So there's this, they want to make sure that they always have product availability, right, with short delivery times, right? So what this company's strategy is basically called a dual offense defense supply chain strategy. Okay, so the offense component focuses on centralizing production in locations with strong manufacturing expertise, competitive labor costs, right, such as China, right, so that they can enjoy economies of scale, right? So that's their basically offense, which is a centralized strategy, right? But meanwhile, they also have the defense strategy. Okay, so the defense strategy involves diversifying supply chains, right? So they would establish additional production hubs in markets with low geopolitical risks, right? And they will, and these new hubs will be used to fulfill local content requirement, for example. Okay, so in some sense, the offense strategies pulls your manufacturing into one or two countries, and the defense strategy spread out or diversify your manufacturing to reduce the geopolitical risk. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so I'm illustrating their strategies based on our framework as well. Okay, our final and the third example is a European manufacturer. Okay, it produces home appliances, large home appliances, right? And because of the very bulky, heavy nature of its products, the company's supply chain traditionally is highly regionalized. So they use what's so-called a local for local production. The biggest source of geopolitical risk for this company's supply chain is actually from its lower tier suppliers, because even though this company is using a local for local production approach, its lower tier suppliers have a globalized production network, right, which can be potentially affected by trade disruptions or geopolitical disruptions. Okay, so that's why the focus of this company is to develop an end-to-end view of its supply chain. Okay, what does it mean? An end-to-end view of a supply chain means it wants to obtain transparency with respect to not only its biggest supplier, but its tier 2, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers whatsoever. All right, and then find out what are the risk exposure to these much smaller companies. Okay, because these suppliers are smaller, right? They may not have a mature supply chain risk management function, right? So this big company, this European manufacturer, needs to support it, right? Because otherwise, when the tariff hits, if these smaller suppliers go down, then your company will go down. Your company will not be able to produce also, right? So basically, the company's main job is to support the suppliers' risk management. They share, for example, forecasted data with these smaller suppliers. They monitor disruption risk for these smaller suppliers. They share risk assessment. They share action plans with these suppliers. And in fact, one of the things that they do, as you can see here, is they try to manage inbound inventory as a form of customer managed inventory. In other words, they're going to manage the supplier's inventory, right? Why? What's the benefit? Because if you manage a supplier inventory, right, you can basically create safety buffers, right? You can reduce the disruption risk even when no alternative suppliers become available in light of disruption, because you still have some, stock, some parts available. Okay. All right. So this is the third example. So these three examples are very different companies, and they all have very different strategies. But as you can see, all of them are using our framework, right? Okay. So this is my last slide, and in this last slide, basically to conclude my presentation today, I would like to discuss some general managerial takeaways. Okay. If you think about geopolitical risks, right, the relationships between countries certainly becomes relevant. So the first advice or the first managerial takeaway is that instead of considering a country's internal political stability, right, because geopolitical risks are defined by the interaction of different countries for one country with another, companies need to actually consider inter-country relationships, right, in addition to firm level or country level risks. Okay. And the second, the source of geopolitical risk often lies in the decisions of a small number of high-ranking government officials, right? I talked about this earlier today as well. So in order to assess geopolitical risk, companies need to understand the decision-making process, right, and the distribution of political power, right, among the government leaders, right? So that becomes crucial for assess geopolitical risk, right? In other words, if a company outsources information gathering to a third party, it needs to make sure that this third party has, the right relationship, has the right staff. Okay. Next, analyzing the impact of geopolitical disruption and think about a global supply chain structure is actually very complex task, right? So it requires a lot of data, a lot of information, high levels of data availability and transparency, right? That's the downside. But the good side is this supply chain data can be leveraged to develop your resilience strategies, right? They can connect decisions to a company's performance outcomes, right? Using a model and optimization, as I mentioned before. So whatever your goal is, right, including, for example, your cost, your revenue, profits, customer satisfaction, or whatever your competitive advantage is. Okay. Excellent. Financial flows, right? Financial flows are always tied to material flows within a global supply chain, right? We know that when, for example, goods across borders, they always trigger various cash flows, right? The problem of financial flows is that they are always influenced by factors such as taxes or foreign exchange rate, right? Foreign exchange volatility. And this volatility can actually escalate during geopolitical disruptions. So therefore, to evaluate the impact of geopolitical strategies across different scenarios, it is very important to account for your cash flow properly. Okay. And finally, many traditional resilience strategies could be performed by a company on its own, right? So for example, if you want to improve your inventory management, or if you want to conduct supplier diversification. But in the case of geopolitical risk. Disruptions are usually dependent on supplier location choices. So that means unilateral changes in a company's production location will be insufficient to address geopolitical risks, right? Instead, companies need to evaluate their supply chain from an end-to-end perspective. They need to align their resilience approach with their suppliers. Okay, I think that's all I want to talk about. I want to finish my presentation by saying thank you, and also by saying that, you know, despite these general managerial insights that I just mentioned, after talking to a lot of companies, what we realize is that there is, in fact, no one-size-fits-all strategy, right, for hedging geopolitical risk, because there can be different forms of geopolitical risk. Each company's optimal resilience approach can vary based on each company's unique supply chain characteristics and the specific goal, or risks that they have, right? Yet, the framework that I presented today, right, the prepare, being proactive and then react, the framework that I presented today, we hope that it can be useful, right? Because we think that it can help most individual companies to structure their thinking, structure their approach to navigating, the best strategies to deal with geopolitical risks. Okay, that's all I want to talk about.
好，谢谢崔老师的报告啊，这个用几张非常精炼的这个 slides 啊，给我们展现了这个关于地缘这个政治风险啊，在供应链里面的这样的一些这个最新的一些框架性的啊，或者说前沿性的这样的一个探索啊。总体来说呢，这个我大概看到了，应该学习了很多啊。这个第一个是说我们这种风险它有什么特征啊，包括是吧，在关税啊、制裁和这个政治冲突等等啊所产生的这个 risk 和其他的传统的 risk 一些不一样的地方。第二个呢，针对这样的一个 risk 的话 ，risk 是我们怎么在 supply chain 里面这个用到的一些方法、战略啊，还有一些举措。那么基于这样的一个这个3个步骤，又给我们讲了3个 case 啊，这个应该包括像农机啊和这个家具等等啊，我觉得应该讲是既有高度又有这个实践可操作性啊。当然这是一个很前沿的一个探索啊，应该也是一个很新的啊，据我所知，应该是崔老师的一个非常在这个方面研究的一个很前沿的一个 topic 的一个分享。所以呢，借这个机会看看我们今天刚才这个董老师跟我讲，今天我们这个 FEM 的这个公益讲坛应该是在周末创最高的人数了啊，近期应该是有很多老师和同学对这个非常的感兴趣可以借这个机会，我们正常的应该还有10分钟的提问时间啊，到这个9点钟之前，所以请在线的各位老师和同学可以踊跃的提问和这个崔老师进行沟通。好的
这个我是北工大的彭瑞，我就是因为我是搞可靠性的，我看这个跟风险相关，我就来听一下，因为可靠性实际上风险韧性都比较相关。
好，彭老师你好啊。
我是看您最后那个总结的里面是有那个 firm level 和 country level， 就是企业层面和国家层面，对吧？对，就我看，因为企业比较微观，国家比较宏观，是不是还有那个产业层面？因为经济有微观、宏观和中观嘛，相当于中观就产业层面。就我们相当于可以用多层次的一个复杂网络结构，就是有企业、有产业、有国家，国家之间的关系，最后就是各个网络之间耦合，用复杂网络的方法，就是来研究这个风险。
是的，您说的很对，我把那个
对，我就问这个问题，谢谢。
对，您问的很好，谢谢您。我先分享一下，您说的是现在好像不能分享了，没关系。那我就回答
就是 firm level 和 country level 最后一页那个，应该大家都记得。
对，那个产业层面也非常重要其实因为我是在乔治城大学，然后乔治城大学是在美国的华盛顿，就是美国的首都，所以我平时也跟一些美国政府的官员也会聊一些事情。对于他们来说，产业特别重要，他们会就是作为政府，他担心的是，当然他们是美国的官员，所以他们会从美国的方式来考虑，他们会考虑哪些产业在美国来说它叫national security，right， 就是国家安全、国家性质，哪些产业是最主要的 ，right？ 比如说芯片，它为什么要抑制？比如说芯片出口到中国，因为他就觉得芯片是对他来说是一个很重要的国家安全的一个事情，所以他会对不同的产业进行，比如说打分，他打分的时候会看，比如说2个维度，第一个就是说你这个产业是不是一个高风险的产业，right？ 你的这个是不是会影响到national security，right？ 第一个维度是你的重要性，right？ 第二个我说错了，第一个是重要性，第二个维度就是你的风险性，就是说你的这个受到 geopolitical risk 多少，还是或者说美国有没有这个能力去生产这个产业所需要的supply chain，right？ 比如说这个产业它既是一个高风险产业，同时美国有没有能力去生产这个东西，比如说一个产业需要很多的稀有金属，比如说稀有金属它都是从中国或其他国家进口，如果这个产业是是一个就是国家安全的产业，同时又是一个比如说高风险就是高风险 disruption 的产业，那对于他来说就是首要的当务之急，就是怎么去解决这个风险。所以是的，所以对于一个公司来说，他们在想他们的策略的时候，的确要从这个公司层面，要从产业层面和国家层面都考虑到这个不同的 geopolitical risk， 因为对不同的产业、不同的公司、不同的国家，这个 geopolitical risk 的风险程度都是不一样。
非常感谢，尤其以后在线下再有时间再向您请教，这个受益匪浅。
谢谢，我也学了很多，谢谢您提的问题。
好，谢谢彭老师。那看看我们还有一个提问的机会啊，看看哪位老师和同学。
崔老师，你好。
施老师啊，施老师加言啊。好，
崔老师你好，我是那个中山大学的那个徐家燕啊，今天非常高兴听到你这个精彩的报告啊，因为我也是在做这个全球供应链管理这个相关的研究的，就是做这个关税啊、企业所得税啊，还有出口退税对这个供应链的一个影响啊，有些工作也是跟蒋老师一起做的啊，我们做了一些工作啊，所以就是我有个技术上的一个问题啊，就是说我们传统里面，例如说我们研究关税的对这个供应链的一个影响啊，很多时候就是说我们对吧，我们关税是一个变量对吧，是一个参数在我们的模型里面，然后我们说我们研究这个参数可能未来它上升的话，可能对我们这供应链的一个结构或者是这个它的一个决策啊，或者是供应链成员它的利润啊这些一个影响，但是现在这个特朗普这个2次上台以后，这个关税就是说这关税究竟上升多少，其实很多时候我们也没办法很好去预测，所以从这个角度来说，你觉得例如说把这个关税当做一个像随机变量或者 random variable 这样一个方式处理起来，这个就说你觉得这样一个这个方向这样一个研究问题，你觉得从这个审稿人或者是这个您作为这个顶级期刊的这个 AE 这个角度来看，是一个 viable 的一个这个方向吗？因为我知道的话，好像非常少人把这个就是说，例如说这个关税啊当做一个随机变量，一般呢我们很多人是会把这个 demand 或者是 cost 当做一个随机变量，对吧？但是现在因为特朗普他的一个执政的一个风格，很可能这个对吧？未来这个关税的一个水平不是一个确定的一个东西啊。我想请教一下。
好的，谢谢这个石老师的问题，我对您的研究也是比较熟悉。我觉得这是一个好的假设，对吧？但是就是第一，因为它事实就是这个关税是就像你说的一样不确定的 ，right？ 它可能是比如说他说中国10%，过2天说要再加15%，或者说墨西哥25%，它是有很多的不确定性 ，right？我觉得可以用一个随机的思维去模型这个参数，如果你建模的话，对吧？但是它这个我们其实现在有一篇文章，现在也看这个关税的影响，我们可以线下交流。但是另外一方面你也不能说随便的去模型这个随机，因为就像我刚才说到的，它这个 geopolitical risk，right， 包括这个关税，它都是有因有果的，right， 它不是说我上来Trump 早上起来他不开心他就给你加10%的关税，那不是，是吧？他加10%的关税是有他的理由，right， 他比如说要 make America great again， 或者他要当时他有他的这个经济的考量，right， 所以当他这个比如说有一个关税的时候，你模型的时候还可以考虑到比如说这个关税之后有没有可能被取消，right， 就是你比如说先假设说吧，这也是一个模型的思维，right， 比如说美国它提出了一个关税，那中国会怎么做，right， 中国可以抵制，right， 中国也可以说那我也给你加一个关税，那这样就有可能会 escalate， 会变成一个 trade war，right， 那它是一个随机变量吗？是的，right， 它是一个 probability path， 但是你的 probability path 有可能就是关税越来越高，也有可能说比如说加拿大政府，right， 他马上就到美国跟那个 Trump 谈判，就是说我们把这个控制住，right， 所以他的那个措施就不是跟你这个强硬的抵制，而是说想跟你合作。那这个美国跟加拿大沟通了以后negotiate 了以后，可能他这个geopolitical risk 或者这个 tariff 到时候就没有了，是吧？所以从现在这个角度来看，是有一个很大的 uncertainty。但是我的意思就是说，你是可以用变量去模型，但是你这个变量的这个随机过程，你还是得想一下，因为它牵扯到国家之间的这个 negotiation， 牵扯到这个产业的重要程度，其实，但是我觉得这是一个很好的用一个 game 的一个思维去考虑的一个模型一个假设。
好的，谢谢崔老师。也就是说这个tariff 这个 uncertainty 这个 model 的角度，我们不能从这种完全 follow 这种 cost uncertainty 或者是这种demand uncertainty 那种套路，对吧？
就是我个人的认为是你 tariff 它是就像我刚才说的，任何的 geopolitical risk 它有一个这个演变的过程，是吧？你比如说你在我现在的时候，可能它是一个跟时间有关，比如说我就举个例子，我随便说哈，我没有想得很清楚，比如说你现在去 model 一个 tariff， 现在可能你说 Trump 还没有上台，哎呀，对中国的 tariff 可能是0%到25%，right， 是这样一个随机变量，可能他第一天上台了以后。这个还是一个随机变量，但它可能它的 support 变小了，可能只有10%到15%。就是我的意思说，这个随机你可以用随机变量去模型它，但是这个是要变的，是要根据这个 geopolitical 的这个风险，还有它的 development，不是说一直说就是一个 random cost，不是说一个一成不变的一个随机变量，就是你要想到这个。怎么去这个 randomness 的 trade off 是什么？不是说简单的就说它就是个随机变量，然后永远是个随机变量，因为很多事情会发生。
好的，谢谢，有机会我们线下再交流啊。
好，谢谢你。
好，这个谢谢各位啊，因为时间关系啊，这个我们崔老师这个讲座啊就告一段落。这个再次感谢崔老师的这个精彩报告。这个报告我觉得对我们这个未来的这个供应链韧性的研究应该是很有引领性的啊。后续我们再继续多多交流大家也可以会后呢再跟崔老师进行沟通。那我们再次感谢崔老师，谢谢啊，谢谢，
谢谢蒋老师，谢谢大家，谢谢大家。
好，下面一位呢是富强老师，张老师，张老师你好，也是早上啊，这个早上7点啊，这个很早啊，这个时差，张老师今天给我们带来这个公益讲坛第2个报告啊，这个在这个报告之前呢，请允许我这个简单介绍一下张老师啊。张老师他目前是这个圣路易斯华盛顿大学的这个奥林商学院的这个正教授啊，这个也是冠名的 Dan Broadbent Professor 啊，他主要是在供应链和这个运营技术这个方面这个领域的这个正教授。张老师呢之前是在沃顿商学院拿到这个他的博士学位，那么目前的研究呢主要是聚焦在这个供应链和技术创新还有这个消费者的行为分析这个以及可持续运营等等近年来呢，他呢应该是在这个也做了一些关于这个数据驱动的这个这种实证的这个研究这个同时呢张老师还在这个他的一些成果在这个像 Management Science MSOM OR Market Science 还有这个 POM 等期刊上发表这个多篇啊，这个可能大家也都有很多这个引用啊，各位可能这个在线的各位老师同学应该都看过很多啊，而且呢，他还是在这些期刊啊担任了这个一些这个副主编，包括像 MS、MSOM 啊、Omega 啊这个等等啊，同时呢，他也是我们国家基金委的这个管理科学与工程的英文版啊，这个其实是我们国内啊这个基金委这个主管的啊，非常非常这个重视的一个英文版的期刊啊，一个在我们运营管理里面的一个领域主编啊，同时啊，我们张老师还是在这个各个期刊啊和这个协会里面呢，做了很多公益的事业，包括像这个 MS 这个和 MSOM 的这个审稿人的优秀奖啊，同时也是我们国家级理论人才啊，这个教育部的啊考虑这个敏感词汇，这个我就不是讲具体的啊，就是在各个方面吧，这个张老师做了很多研究，也有很好的学术影响，所以呢，今天也是非常有幸啊，请张老师啊就供应链韧性的一个相关研究啊，这篇文章据我所知呢，应该是在MS 这个在线啊，刚刚在线，是关于这个全球的这个采购的这个过程中啊，与供应链相关的一个比较前沿的研究。那么下面呢，就这个让我们这个欢迎这个张老师为我们在线上做报告。张老师有请。
Okay. Okay. Thanks, Professor Jiang. Let me share my screen first. Okay. Can you see my shared screen?
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Okay. Okay, let's get started. Thanks again, Professor Jiang, for the kind introduction. And also thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure to have this opportunity to share my recent research with everyone. In today's presentation, I'm gonna talk about price volatility and contracting in global commodity procurement. This is a joint work with my co-authors, Xing Wei, Liu Liming, and Zhao Qian. Right now, we are thinking about how to extend this research. So if there are any questions or comments, either during the presentation or at the end of the presentation, I will be happy to discuss them. We appreciate any feedback that may help us dive deeper into this line of research. First, a little bit background about this topic. We know global supply chains are important because they allow firms to access a wider range of materials and labor at potentially lower costs, which can lead to better products and better prices for customers. However, managing a global supply chain could be challenging because the complex structure and the risks involved in the supply chain. So basically, we can view a global supply chain as a complex system. So although supply chain management has been extensively studied in the past few decades, there are a lot of new issues in managing global supply chains caused by various factors, such as geopolitical tensions, the pandemic, and the recent trend of regionalization. Just now, my colleague Shiliang talked about managing geopolitical risks in supply chains. So his talk has set a stage for my presentation. At the same time, these challenging issues provide new opportunities for us researchers as well. So in today's presentation, I will address one of the challenges in global supply chain management, specifically how to manage price volatility in global commodity procurement. Okay, here's the motivation for our research problem. First of all, we know there's a wide range of commodities that are being traded every day in the global market. This includes agricultural products, gas and oil, iron ore, precious metals, and many other things. And this is a huge market. I Googled it yesterday and found that the global commodity trading profits topped $100 billion in 2023. Notice that this is the profit, this is not the revenue. If you look at a single commodity product, for example, iron ore, okay, the global iron ore market size was valued at $280 billion in 2023. Given the sheer size of the market, we know that commodity procurement is a very important decision faced by firms in today's global economy. However, managing such commodity procurement could be difficult because there are some unique features associated with the international commodity market. For example, the geographical separation of supply and consumption leads to a long and complicated procurement process. We can imagine that a Chinese firm, a Chinese buyer, procuring iron ore from Brazil. Okay, in today's paper, I'm gonna use iron ore procurement as an illustration. However, all the results can apply to other commodities too. So if you think about this procurement process, it may consist of many stages, including supply qualification, contracting, financing and payment, transportation, customs clearance, and so on. Okay, it's a very long and complicated process. And not only that, okay, uncertainties may arise from both the supply and demand sides in such a supply chain, and they can pose significant challenges to the buyers and importers. In addition to that, firms, may have to place orders regularly over time. Okay, and it's very costly to negotiate each order with the supplier. So as a result, the buyers often need to use long-term contracts to manage this kind of transaction. Let me give you more information about the practice for iron ore procurement. Again, remember that the global iron ore market size was $280 billion, which is a huge market. And as far as I remember, about half of this number was imported by Chinese buyers. So here's the evolution of the contracts used for iron ore procurement. Just a brief history. Before 2009, global iron ore giants like Rio Tinto, Vale, so on and so forth, and those large Asian steel makers, they engaged in multilateral negotiations every year to determine an annual fixed price for the coming year. Okay, so this is the old practice. They just negotiate the annual price and then use the price for the coming year. However, for many reasons, okay, such a mechanism broke down in 2009. And after that, the quarterly contracts with a price pegged to the 3-month average of the Platts iron ore index have been widely used. And meanwhile, the global iron ore market also began to adopt a new contract format where the contract price was linked to the IODEX, and also the price will be determined at the delivery time rather than at the contracting time. So this is a new contract format. So basically, if you look at the history, there are two major developments during the past 15 years. One is the use of the IODEX for pricing, okay, rather than negotiation every year. Two is the adoption of the new contract format, okay. So in this new contract format, you determine the price at the delivery time rather than the contracting time. So I'm going to elaborate more on this contract in the next slide. Okay, according to Vail, one of the largest suppliers of iron ore, they summarize the following prevalent practice in today's iron ore market. So a couple of things. One, procurement price is often pegged to an index. Okay, so the most commonly used index is called IODEX. And two, there are two different types of contracts depending on the price timing. So one type is called fixed price contract, or FPC. So in this contract, the price is determined at the time of contracting. So when you sign a contract with the supplier, you fix the price, okay, for the next certain time period. The other type is called a contingent price contract, or CPC, okay? By contingent, you can imagine that the price is not determined at the contracting time. Instead, the price will be determined at the time of delivery. Okay, so when you sign the contract, the price is still open, the price is still uncertain. Okay, given the availability of these two contract formats, okay, so these are the two most commonly used contract formats, a natural question arises: which one is better, FPC or CPC, right? How should a firm choose between these two contract types? Remember that fixed price contract, the price is fixed when you sign the contract, but for CPC, the price is undetermined, okay, when you sign the contract. So which is better? That's the key question we are gonna address in today's talk. So again, the main purpose of this research is to understand which contract should be used and when, right, under what market conditions. So this is very important because we can imagine that a slightly more efficient contract can save a buyer billions of dollars, especially for those large Chinese buyers or steel makers. So before we dive into the detailed analysis, let's take a look at the pros and cons of the FPC contract at a high level. So it's very clear that FPC, or the fixed price contract, can lock in the buying price. So we can avoid the upside price risk, right? So if the index price goes up in the future, you don't care, right? Because you fix the price when you sign the contract. So you avoid this upside price risk. But you have to incur some other risks if you use FPC. The first one is the demand risk, okay? The time between placing an order and receiving the delivery is quite long, okay, for this kind of commodity procurement. So during which the market may change significantly. So this may impose a huge risk on the buyers. I gave you one example here. The largest Chinese soybean importer went bankrupt in 2014. That's about 10 years ago, because it procured 1 million tons of soybean on FPC, but then demand dropped 15% right before the delivery. The other potential risk firms may have to incur is the selling price risk. That is, the selling price could be much lower than the buying price. Okay, so here's another example. A lot of iron ore importers using this FPC contract went bankrupt in 2017 because the iron ore price dropped by 30% within 1 month. So in contrast, if you look at CPC, right? So the CPC entails an uncertain buying price. So that sounds riskier, right? It's risky because the price is not locked in. But at the same time, it allows the price, the future price, right, to be linked to future market conditions. That is, the buyer can update both the buying price and the future demand using early demand signals. So you can see that there are both pros and cons for the FPC contract and also the CPC contract. Okay, now we may summarize the bias problem as follows. So we study this topic from the perspective of the importers or the buyers, which contract they should use. So first, they need to find a supplier and sign a long-term contract that specifies a pricing scheme. Right? You need to identify a supplier and then sign a long-term contract with a certain pricing scheme. And then after that, you place orders regularly, right, to satisfy your demand or your production requirements during this contract period. But the challenge is that future demand and index prices are uncertain. So you are facing all these kind of risks or uncertainties when you make your contract decision and also your ordering decisions. By the way, the other thing I want to emphasize is that for most industries that rely heavily on global commodity procurement, there's intense market competition. Think about the steel makers, right, in the Chinese market. So when the buyers choose their procurement strategy, they have to take the competitors' actions into account. So we have to study this problem in a competitive setting because that's normally the case. Given the above motivation, we try to answer the following questions using this research. The first one is, how should the buyers choose between FPC and CPC contracts under competition? Second, how does index price volatility, so this is a price risk or price uncertainty, impact the buyer's decisions? And then third, why is CPC becoming more popular despite its seemingly high risk? So as we go through today's presentation, I'm going to show you the answers to these three questions. For the sake of time, I will very quickly go through the literature. So there are two groups of related studies. The first group studies the CPC contract in vertical supply chains. The focus of these papers is on how to share the risks between the supply chain members. The second group of papers study information acquisition and information sharing under competition. A key difference between our paper and the literature is that we consider the so-called two-dimensional information updating. That is, in the CPC contract, the buyer can use early demand signals to update both the procurement price and demand information. So this two-dimensional information updating has not been studied in the prior literature. And I'm going to talk more about this later. Okay, let's look at the model setting. For the sake of time, I will quickly go through the model settings. We consider two competing firms, okay? Let's say A and B. They procure a commodity from an offshore supplier to sell locally. We can extend this model to consider more than two firms, but the qualitative insights will not change. The suppliers provide two contract choices, FPC and CPC, which means the firm can choose either of the two contracts. Normally, for the same supplier, you cannot use both types of contracts, okay? So if you want to use two different contracts at the same time, you have to use dual sourcing. But when you use dual sourcing, there are many other issues as well. For example, the quality of the iron ore, okay? Because different suppliers, they offer different types of iron ores, which may not be suitable for your production, for your furnace, for example. So we focus on just one contract type for each firm. So here's a timeline. I want to explain this timeline a little bit because this can help us understand the decision sequence and also the information structure of the model. So you can see there are three time points, right, on this graph: TS, TO, and TD. So at TS, each firm chooses a procurement contract, either FPC or CPC, right, which determines the pricing scheme. In the middle, at time TO, this is the ordering stage. So both firms, they're going to get some early demand signals. They're going to update their belief about future market, and then they are going to decide the procurement quantities research. Remember, this is a long-term contract. You may place multiple orders within a certain contract period, but the analysis will be the same for each order. So we just focus on a single order in this research. Let me continue with the model setting. A few more things I need to introduce. The firm's profit functions are given by the following equations. If you use FPC, your profit will be equal to price PI minus W times quantity. So here W is the fixed price, right? Because you are using a fixed price contract. If you use CPC, the format is the same. The profit function format is the same. The only difference is now is PI minus S. S is the index price because your actual procurement price is pegged to this IODEX index price. Okay, so if you use CPC, S is a random variable when you sign the contract. The market clearance price for firm I is given by this equation. Okay, PI is equal to A plus epsilon A minus QI minus gamma QJ. Very standard demand function for a duopoly setting. So A is the intercept of the demand function. This is a constant. It's deterministic. But epsilon A is the random noise in the demand intersect. Okay, so that's why we have demand uncertainty. And gamma measures the intensity of competition. The higher the gamma, the more competitive the market is. The index price S is equal to mu S plus epsilon S. So mu S is the expectation of the price, okay? So this is a parameter, it's given, okay? But epsilon S is a random variable. So this is how we inject the noise into, or uncertainty into the index price. And the key element of this problem setting is the correlation between epsilon S and epsilon A. Okay, this is very important. Okay, this is the key to the model. This basically says that there's a correlation between your future market demand and your future index price. Because of this correlation, rho, right? Rho is greater than 0, less than 1. Because of this correlation, when you receive an early demand signal, you can update your belief about future demand, and also you can update your belief about your index price, okay, your future procurement price, if you use the CPC contract. Price volatility, we use this ratio between sigma S and sigma A. So they are the standard deviations for the index price and the market demand. Okay, we use this to measure price volatility. So the signal for firm I, remember that when they place the order quantity decision, when they make the order quantity decisions, they can receive an early demand signal, so they can update their belief about future market. So for firm I, Fi is equal to epsilon A plus epsilon I. Okay, remember epsilon A is the random noise in the demand. Okay, so you are going to see a signal, which is not perfect signal, but you can use this signal Fi to update your belief about your future market demand. Okay, so it's a very commonly used updating model in the literature. And finally, we assume there could be a forecast correlation between the two firms, right? The two firms, they are going to collect the data, right? Use certain data sets to update about future demand. It's very likely, because they are in the same market, right? It's very likely there are some overlaps in the data sets they use to forecast future demand. So the two demand signals the firms get could be correlated. So eta is the correlation between these two forecasts. Okay, I want to emphasize that this is a pretty standard way to model demand information updating in the literature, right? If you are familiar with this literature, this is a pretty standard way to model that. But the key or the key twist in this in our model setting is this correlation between index price and your future market demand. Okay, and because of this, you can use early demand signal to update your procurement price, right? So this is the so-called two-dimensional information updating. So I'm going to talk more about this in the next few slides. And this is the major element that drives some of the main results in our model. So these are the notations used in the paper. For the sake of time, I'm going to skip this slide. In case we need to use them to explain certain things, I may come back to this again. Okay, I want to use another slide to show you the timing of the model again, especially how firms update their information in this model, because this is the key to understanding most of the results. So again, you can see this decision and information timeline. So the key thing I want to mention is the stage in the middle, which is TO. So this is when firms make their order quantity decisions, right? If you use an FPC contract, a fixed price contract, then you can update about epsilon A using your demand signal Fi, right? But if you use CPC contract, if you choose the CPC contract, then you can update on both epsilon A and epsilon S, right? Because you see the signal Fi, so you can infer something about future demand, right? Because this future demand is correlated with your future procurement price, which is the index price, you can also update your belief about this index price. So this is the so-called two-dimensional information updating, right? You're updating both future demand and future procurement price if you use CPC. And this has not been studied in the literature, and later I'm going to show you this twist plays a key role in the impact of price volatility and in the firm's contract choice. Very quickly, the roadmap for the rest of the presentation. So we can solve this problem using backward induction. So first we can solve the second stage problem, which is a Kuno subgames. So this is a quantity competition, right? After you receive the products. So there are 4 subgames, FF, CC, FC, or CF, depending on the contract choices of the 2 firms. And then we go back to look at the first stage game, which is the sourcing game. So in this game, the firms choose their contract types. Now, let me show you the equilibrium results in the Kuno subgames. We're going to use the Bayes and Nash equilibrium concept to characterize the game outcome. So instead of showing you all those complicated formulas, I will just explain the structure of the order quantity decision, okay? So for each firm, the order quantity decision has 2 components. So here you can see BQ and IQ. BQ is the base quantity, and IQ is the information quantity, okay? So this IQ term can be written as Ki times Fi. Remember, Fi is the signal, right? You get a signal. Signal can be high, can be low, and Ki is the coefficient of this demand signal. So this Ki is quite critical in our analysis and in the interpretation of the results. So we're going to refer to the absolute value of Ki as the adjustment magnitude, okay? So how much you want to change your order quantity based on signal, basically. And then the direction or the sign of Ki is called the adjustment direction, okay? So Ki can be positive or negative. If it's positive, it means a stronger signal leads to a higher order quantity. But if Ki is negative, a stronger signal can lead to a lower order quantity. Okay, so this Ki is quite important in our analysis. So I'm going to use this again in the next few slides. To help you understand this order quantities, I just want to give you one example. So this formula you see at the bottom of the slides, this is QIFF. This is the equilibrium quantity in the FF subgame. Okay, so you can see the first term is the base quantity. It has nothing to do with the demand signal. So we call this the base quantity. But the second term is called the information quantity. Okay, so you can see this can be written as a big coefficient times Fi, right? So this is a big Ki times Fi. Again, this information quantity is is how we measure how the order quantity will change in response to the demand signal. Next, I'm going to introduce the price learning effect. So what is price learning effect? So let's start with the FF subgame. If you look at the FF subgame, the KI can be written as follows. Okay, it's given by this formula here. So remember, in the FF game, there's no price learning, right? Because the procurement price is fixed. But if you look at the CC subgame, in the CC subgame, the firms use CPC contracts. Both firms use CPC contracts. If you look at this KI, remember KI measures how the order quantity change in response to the demand signal, right? So here's the formula. So we can compare these two different KIs, right? KIFF and KICC. The difference is this 1 minus rho theta, right? So what is theta? What is rho? Theta is the price volatility, remember that? And rho is the demand price correlation. So that's something you can use to update your procurement price. So this 1 minus rho theta, that's the additional factor we observe when we use the CPC contract. This 1 minus rho theta in KI is referred to as the price learning effect. Okay. If rho is equal to 0, then this term becomes 1. We go back to the FF subgame. Okay, but if rho is not equal to 1, not equal to 0, then this term is non-zero, and we know that because of this correlation, you can update about your price. So we're going to have this price learning effect, and this will change the firm's order quantity. Does that make sense? Okay. So this PLE or price learning effect arises from the use of CPC. It only happens in CPC. And price information updating. Because of rho is greater than 0, you can update about your future price. Okay, so I want to say this again. Under CPC, the firm can learn about the procurement price using the early demand signal. Okay, and as a result, the order quantity decision will change accordingly, right? How does it change? Mathematically speaking, we're going to have a new factor, which is a 1 minus rho theta. Okay, so the change is represented by this KI coefficient. Good. How does this information updating affect firms' ordering behavior? So let's look at the CC subgame here. If you look at the IQ, which is the information quantity, right, under the CC subgame, so this is the IQ term in the order quantity formula. The PLE may reverse the adjustment direction if theta is greater than 1 over rho, right? You can see this additional factor 1 minus rho theta here. If theta is greater than 1 over rho, then this additional term will be negative, which means you change the direction for how you respond to the demand signal, right? If it's positive, we go up. If it's negative, the quantity go down. So how can this happen? Intuition is that a stronger demand signal Fi, right? If you see certain demand signal, you are going to respond, right? You're going to change your order quantity based on this demand signal. If you see a strong demand signal, there are two effects on your order quantity. First, it indicates a high demand. Obviously, you want to increase your order quantity. So this demand updating effect leads to a higher order quantity. However, there's an opposite driving force too, because strong demand signal indicates a high procurement price, right? In CPC, you know that if demand is strong, because of the positive correlation between demand and index price, my procurement price should be high too. So this leads to lower order quantity. So if theta is greater than 1 over rho, it means that price updating dominates demand learning and thus reverses the overall learning effect. Okay, so from this discussion, we can see that the price learning effect, or in other words, the two-dimensional information updating could be very different from one-dimensional information updating, right? Because this price updating can override the demand updating. Okay, so this will change many of the results we have seen in the literature before. So how does price volatility affect firms' profits, right? Intuitively, high price volatility will make firms worse off, right, in terms of their profits. So if you look at the CC subgame, okay, that is both firms use CPC contracts. The firm's ex-ante profit, expected profit in equilibrium, is given by this formula. So basically, it shows that the profit will increase if theta is greater than 1 over rho. The profit will decrease in theta if theta is less than 1 over rho. So there's a threshold. This is an interesting result because it says that under certain conditions, the price volatility, a higher price volatility actually can increase firms' profits. So here's the intuition. When price volatility is high, price updating dominates demand updating. Okay, and the firm's responsiveness, which is measured by the absolute value of Ki, increases in theta if theta is greater than 1 over rho, which leads to higher profits for both firms. So I want to emphasize that this interesting results depends on the price learning effect. Okay, if rho is equal to 0, which means there's no price learning, then this result will not happen. At least for this, when W is not equal to mu s, that is, one of the contract type has certain cost advantage. So if W is less than mu s, both firms will choose FF. If W is greater than mu s, both firms will choose CC. So the conclusion is quite simple. So if there's no price learning, okay, then firms pursue the procurement price advantage in the sourcing game. Okay, whichever contract gives you the lower expected procurement price, you choose that contract. Okay, this is when there's no price learning. What will happen if there is price learning? That is, rho is greater than 0. Okay, so for ease of exposition, I will look at W is equal to mu s. That is, both contracts have the same cost efficiency. Because if one contract has a better cost efficiency, it will make this contract more attractive. That's quite intuitive, right? When the costs are the same for the two contract types, we find that if theta is small, less than 2 over rho, then equilibria could be either FF or FC. If theta is greater than 2 over rho, that is, price volatility is very high, then the equilibria could be either FC or CC. Now you can see that CC is possible, right, when theta is very high. The detailed results about the sourcing game equilibrium for rho greater than 0 is very tedious. Okay, it depends on the parameters, the market parameters, and they have very long expressions. So I don't want to dive into all the technical details. So the conclusion we have from this rho greater than 0 case is that high price volatility induces firms to pursue the responsiveness of the CPC, which means high price volatility makes CPC more attractive. Okay, so I think I'm almost out of time. So let me quickly wrap up the results. So one more thing I want to show you is, in general, we find that there are several factors that may affect the firm's contract choice. The first one is, the firm is more likely to choose CPC if the following happens, okay? The price volatility is high, okay? Or the price-demand correlation is strong, which means the price learning effect is stronger, right? Then you tend to prefer CPC. And then the market size is small, right? Why is that the case? Because if the market size is small, then understanding the demand becomes more important, right? Because the size is small, right? So be more responsive or have better understanding about market demand, about procurement price will be more important, right? So which can be offered by CPC. Or if there's an intense competition, okay? If there's an intense competition, we can actually show that, firms tend to use differentiated contracts. For the sake of time, I didn't touch upon these results in today's talk, but it's given in the paper. If the firm has superior forecast accuracy, again, you can better forecast demand, you can better forecast future price, then CPC will allow you to do those things. So better forecast capability will make CPC more attractive. Okay, the last slide. What are the major takeaways from this talk? We study a commodity procurement problem in which there are both demand and price uncertainties. Okay, we find that in the competitive procurement setting, a price learning effect arises from CPC and creates the so-called two-dimensional information updating. And because of this two-dimensional information updating, we have the following two results. The first one is the firm's ex-ante profits may increase in price volatility when the volatility is sufficiently high. Second, the prevalence of CPC in global commodity procurement could be explained by the price learning effect. Again, this arises due to the two-dimensional information updating, which may improve firms' responsiveness to market changes. Okay, I think I'm out of time already. So with that, I will end my talk. Thank you all for being here today. I think we still have a little bit of time, so I will be happy to take questions if there are any.
好，谢谢张老师啊，这个精彩的报告，这时间把控的特别好，这也非常的这个精炼。我觉得张老师做一个很好的这个关于这个就是全球的这个商品采购啊，这么一个很受现在这个供应链关注的一个问题啊。其实呢，这个出发点看起来也是非常的直观啊，就是我们用这个固定的这个价格合同，还是用这种动态或者变化的啊，然后仔细分析了，这个应该讲，我觉得很有这个实用性啊，实践性。但这个可能啊，大家对这个方面呢，我想一个在线的各位老师和同学也有相关的可能从事这方面的研究的啊，借这个机会看看跟我们张富强老师来进行这个沟通交流，看看老师和同学谁来有问题可以提出来啊。
张老师你好，我是那个来自中山大学的这个徐家燕，就是感谢你这个精彩的报告，就是我有一个小的问题啊，就是说，因为你的报告里面其实基本上没有体现，就是说我们这个你 model 里面这个竞争对这个结果的一个影响，对吧？就是基本上没有讲这个影响。我在想，因为你这个刚才这个论文里面一个major results 就是说这个企业它的利润有可能是随着这个 price 这个价格的一个变动递增的啊，这个当这个波动性比较大的时候会递增。那我不知道这里面这个竞争在这里面会起到一个什么样一个作用？我的猜想不知道是不是正确，就是说它是不是就是说如果这个西塔这个变大的话，是在某种程度上它是不是有点减弱两个企业它的一个竞争呢？就是这个 old quantity 这样一个竞争。但是我不知道我的这个猜想是不是正确的，因为我只是听了这个40多分钟，所以当然我在想这个竞争在里面在起到一个什么样一个作用，所以我想了解一下啊。
好的，谢谢嘉燕老师，这是挺好的问题。实际上呢，在我们的文章里面呢，我们是讲到这个竞争强度的这个影响，就是记得吗？那个 demand function 里面有一个 parameter 叫 lambda， 对吧？lambda 越大的话，那么这个 competition intensity 我们叫竞争强度就会越大。我们实际上研究了这个竞争强度对这个企业这个合约选择的影响，对吧？也研究了就是说它对这个信息的更新等等的影响。一个结论呢，就是既然这个嘉燕老师问到这个问题，一个结论就是说，如果这个强度更大的话，竞争强度更大的话， 这个企业会更愿意选择这个 CPC contract。OK，从这个角度来讲呢，实际上就是说，它可以帮助这个企业更好的了解市场，对吧？来更新它的这个信息，所以在竞争当中会使它更有优势。所以竞争越强，你更希望是一个 responsive 的 firm， 对吧？因为你可以了解更好的这个市场信息，然后做出你这个采购的决策，这样对你是有好处的。至于这个 competition intensity 怎么影响这个 price volatility，这个我需要再思考一下，因为 on the top of mind 我不记得这个 price volatility 的影响跟这个竞争强度它的 interaction 是什么。但是在 paper 里我们应该有 address 这个 issue。
好的，谢谢张老师，后面有机会再向你请教啊。
对，要感兴趣的话也可以这个读一下这个 paper。
好，谢谢佳言啊。看看还有没有其他老师同学有问题。
张老师你好。
你好。
你好，刚才听了您这个报告，感觉比较有意思，然后也挺感兴趣。就是您这里面主要是讨论2种合同，一个是 FPC， 还有一个是 CPC 然后这里面一个比较重要的因素就是这个叫 price learning effect， 特别是它受到这个价格波动的影响。就这里面我就是想进一步了解的就是这个在这个 CPC 的情况下，因为它是在配送的时候再开始才定价，而那个fixed price contract 它是在开始的时候就已经定了这个价格，所以就是我想要就是我不太了解的就是这个 price learning effect， 正常情况下的话，我们是不是在这个FPC 的情况下，我已经知道这个价格了，所以说它其实也是有这个price learning effect 的，而在这个 CPC 的情况下，它实际上是开始是不知道的，然后但是它是在开始配送的时候才知道这个价格，然后才决定这个订货量。所以我想问的问题就是，其实在 FPC 的情况下，它也有这个price learning effect， 就是但是它为什么它的这个作用就体现的不如这个 CPC 更加的明显？
好的，谢谢你这个问题。我想澄清一下，就是说在 FPC 里面的话，你签合约的时候，这个你的采购价格就已经给定了，对吧？
对的。
所以从这个角度来讲呢，它就不情况在波动，对吧？你可以想象有一个这个就像股票市场一样，它有个 index， 股票的 index， 它这个价格是波动的，对吧？然后呢，在你 place 每一个 order 的时候，你都可以收集一些关于市场的信息嘛，对吧？所以时间的变化，你一直在收集这种信息嘛。就是大的这种钢铁厂商，他们都在收集这种信息。那么你可以不断的更新你对未来的需求的信息。如果你是 CPC contract 的话，你用这个需求的信息也可以猜测未来的这个index price 的信息。所以从这个角度来讲，你有这个 price learning effect。对，所以这个整个的 paper， 这个我觉得它的 key twist， 所以它的这个最核心的一个要素 drive 这些 results， 就是你可以 update 你将来的这个 procurement price 的信息，然后这个东西可以影响到你的 profit， 你的 contract choice。我想这是这个文章的核心。所以从这个角度来讲的话，这个 fixed price contract 你基本上是没有这个price learning effect 在里面。至少这两个 model 相比来言的话，对不对？一个有，一个没有。对。
明白了。所以这个 CPC 其实是更有灵活性一些。
更有灵活性，对。 对，就看起来它 risky 了，对吧？因为你签合约的时候，你的价格还不定嘛，对吧？万一价格涨上去怎么办呢？对不对？但是实际上 turns out 就是说你有更多的灵活性，这个灵活性实际上可以超越你这增加了一点点 risk， 反而使你更好。对，这是这个文章一个主要的一个信息吧。对，
好的，谢谢张老师，谢谢张老师。
好，
不客气。
这是这个东北大学管理学的赵金龙博士啊，博士生。好，这个张老师还有
谢谢
我们线上呢有一些老师啊，他可能是通过这个文字的方式啊，有一个典型的问题，我复述一下啊，他是这么问的啊，这个说在什么情况下全球商品采购这个价格波动最小？此时必须签什么样的合同？什么情况下全球价格采购的这个价格波动最大？这个时候出现什么样的合同最佳？根本原因在什么？是什么？啊，这是他提的一个问题。
OK， 好的。关于这个问题，第一个问题是什么时候这个价格波动最大或者最小？这个它是根据市场来决定的，对吧？这个我们不好说什么时候会大，什么时候会小。我想这个取决于这个全球经济环境，对吧？取决于这个地缘经济啊、地缘政治啊，对吧？包括这个现在的战争啊等等，还有这个经济的这个情况啊等等。那这个就是说它随时都随着时间变化的。当然，我们可以说有一个估计，有个猜测，有个 forecast， 对吧？这个 price volatility 会大还是小？第二个问题呢，就是我觉得跟我们研究的这个 paper 研究的问题更相关，就是说在什么情况下你应该用什么样的合约，对吧？那么通过我们的研究，至少在我们的这个 model setting 下面，我们发现的是，当你这个 price volatility 很大的时候，这个 CPC 会更有优势。OK， 这个 CPC 会更有优势。当然还有其他的一些因素了，对吧？后面我倒数第二张 slides 我们也说了，就是说，当你这个市场变小的时候 ，CPC 会更有优势，对吧？当这个 market competition 更强的时候 ，CPC 会更有优势。当这个企业有更好的预测能力的时候 ，CPC 会更有优势。所以我们的研究是给出一个比较基本的这个一个 guidance， 就是在什么情况下这个 CPC 会更好。实际上就是这个问题也牵扯到，就是说，其实在过去的几年啊，这个尤其是5到10年，这个 CPC 变得越来越常用。OK。实际上它是就是2009年之后才出现的嘛，但是过去这些年它变得越来越 popular， 所以我们也想 understand 为什么这个 contract 会变得越来越popular， 对吧？是根据我们的研究的结果呢，我们猜测是我们刚才说的这些因素可能都越来越使这个 CPC 变得更好，比如说市场变得更加不稳定了，对吧？因为这个战争啊，因为地缘竞争啊。对吧？越来越不稳定，那么 CPC 可以让你有更多的这个 flexibility， 有更好的 responsiveness。所以我们就说也觉得这个研究可以部分的解释为什么 CPC 在现在的这个市场环境下越来越被重视、被使用吧。对，这是我的回答。
对，这个我觉得非常好啊。这个我的理解是，就是说 CPC 刚才张老师讲的就是。适应当前这个整个的这个全球的这个商业的这种采购啊和整个供应链，应该说这个能够解决当前这样的一些问题啊，相对于这个 FPC， 其实这里面我自己啊也有个刚才也是在思考一个问题，其实CPC 我们刚才已经验证到啊，就是通过张老师这个研究发现的确是有很好的效果啊，尤其针对当前这个形势。但是这里面其实我们也就是用了一种这个 price loading 这样的一些方式啊，其实说这种 CPC 我们只是选了其中的一种模式，其实这里面还有可能是不是在 CPC 这里面又有更好的一种途径啊？就是说我们现在肯定证明这个 CPC 比这个 FPC 现在这个形势下来是要好的啊，就是说很多方面能够解决更多的，就或者说更加适用这个我们这个情况。但其实，在 CPC 这里面，我们只是采用了一种方式，这种方式是不是最优的？可能还是有可能未来是一个很好的研究的这个点啊。
钟总，这是非常棒的一个问题，我用半分钟时间很快的回应一下。这个因为这个点非常好，就是说确实是这样的，就是说我们只是 就是 focus 上这2种 contract， 对不对？那么另外一个问题就是说，还有没有比这2种更好的 contract， 对吧？实际上我们在审稿的过程当中，投稿这个 review 的过程当中呢，也有 referee 提出，就是说把这2种 contract combine 起来会怎么样？OK， 这也是很 intuitive 的一个 suggestion， 对吧？我们就顺着这个思路研究了一下，当然发现，如果你2个 contract 都用的话，对这个 firm 来说会更好，对吧？因为你2个都有，你的 flexibility 就更大了嘛，对吧？但是呢，我们呢也发现，在现实当中呢，这种情况不多见，就是你2种都用。我们在这个做研究的过程当中，我们也采访了这个中国最大的这个钢铁厂商之一了。从他们那我们了解到呢，实际上如果2个 contract 都用呢，会有它的一些问题。第一呢，像这些大的这种淡水河谷啊，这些大的这个供应商啊，他们一般只允许你用一个。如果你从他那采购，他只让你用1个 contract， 对吧？用2个的话很麻烦嘛，对吧？对他 supplier 来讲。第二呢，如果你想用2个 supplier 不同的 supplier， 对吧？每一个 supplier 用1种 contract 的话，那么这也会造成另外的问题，就是什么呢？就是2种这个铁矿石的材质，它的材料是很不一样的，它的杂质、它的铁含量。它的含硫量都很不一样，你如果混在一起的话，对生产流程会造成很大的影响。有的时候这个炼钢炉啊，它只能适合某一种矿石的，它不是说任何矿石它都可以用的。对，所以从这个角度来讲呢，你提了一个很好的问题，但在现实当中呢，目前我们还没有发现，就是说哪一种很实用，然后又超越这2种 contract 的情况。对，也许我们还需要了解更多或者思考更多，也许存在。但是这是一个 future research direction。
对，如果用2个的话，我觉得的确可能会带来一些操作各方面的问题。我的意思就是说，
但是会有一些成本，这个 implementation 的成本。
CFC 这个里面其实有没有可能再进一步的优化？就是现在我们用的是 CFC， 是我们用刚才你说的这种 price learning effect 是一种学习模式啊。这个里面其实它有可能还有，就是说肯定是 CFC， 但是呢，有没有一种比在 CFC 里面还有一种更优化的一种学习的方法？这样的话呢，可能这个朝这个方向去做，可以各位这个老师和同学是吧？可以跟张老师以后再
是的，对，这个我有些想法，因为你的问题，但是我们因为今天时间的关系，我们不展开讲，所以后面我们在线下聊。好，
那这个在这个时间关系啊，这个我们差不多啊，你超了几分钟。然后在结束之前，张老师，我们刚才应该崔老师在开始之前呢，给大家有一个线上的合影啊。我们现在也请这个现在还在线的这个有100位老师左右啊，这个如果可以的话，打开一下这个摄像头，我们在线上再进行一个合影啊，做一个小纪念。好，那个请这个袁基帮我们拍个照啊。
好，老师。
好，
麻烦各位老师和同学开一下摄像头。OK 了。
好，再次感谢各位啊。特别感谢这个今天这个报告，这个张老师刚刚的精彩报告，包括刚才崔老师啊，这个应该讲是我们 FEM 这个公益讲坛的其中的一个重要的一个部分啊。今天刚才董老师这个跟我们讲，就是 FEM 的这个编辑部的编辑老师啊，说这个今天的这个我们人气非常旺，是因为有了张老师、崔老师这样的一个精彩的报告。当然我刚才看到了，就是我们这个群里面还有一些老师和同学在发一些问题啊，这个因为时间关系呢。这个可能我们可以转成这个会后啊，跟张老师和崔老师啊进行 email 或者进行沟通，包括以后有机会回到国内，我们在线下进行沟通。那么我们今天的这个关于共建韧性的这个 FEM 的公益学术讲坛啊，就到此结束。再次感谢崔老师、张老师和各位。